Hello, everybody, and welcome to the War Room. My name is Olavur Steinason, and I will be your host today. I'm joined by a beautiful panel of experts. It is Darkness, Bubbles, and Spoos. How are you all today? Starting with you, Darkness. How are you feeling?
Feeling great. Very excited about this OCC. There are a lot of new deck lists in the tournament scene. Some of them never shown before on any broadcast. I'm happy to look into those decks.
Yeah, super exciting. What about you, Bubbles?
I'm doing okay. Wearing my pajamas today, just having a bit of a lazy day, but I'm just happy to be here.
I heard you bring some accessories with you when you go to sleep in these pajamas.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a bit of a rough neighborhood, so you never know who's going to sneak into the house.
Yes.
I do have my butter knife, just to be sure. You know, you can never be too safe down in southwest England where the farmers live.
Yes, it's all those sheep. They're terrifying for sure. All right, what about you, Spoos?
Yeah, we had some really stormy days here in Germany and in Europe in general. So I'm glad to see everyone is fine in the panel here and also in the background of the cast. And really looking forward to today's OCC, looking at the deck list before the whole event here. Really made me excited. And I hope we have some good matches here today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm convinced that we're going to have a whole host of good matches today. So, for what we have in store for you in this War Room show here is we're going to go into a detailed breakdown of some of the decks that we're going to be seeing in today's OCC. As the guys have mentioned, this is probably our most diverse OCC in terms of decks that we've seen from the get-go. Nobody is basically bringing the same ideas or same plans or same decks into this one. There's a lot of new innovations, so there's a lot to talk about. But on top of that, we're also going to be revealing 2 cards from the upcoming World at War Behind Enemy Lines expansion. And we're going to start by revealing one of them, then go into the deck talks, and then reveal the second one at the end of the stream. So, are you guys ready for the first card reveal?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, let's bring it up on the screen then. That is Chasing Shadows. It is a French 0 credit order. Target unit moves into the front line if possible. And that, if possible, basically means if the enemy does not control it and if there is room, right? So, starting with you, Darkness, first thoughts when you see this one.
Well, my first impression was not really good because it's not providing a lot just on its own, but it's 0 credit, and there's some interesting combo potential with, for example, Penta A, very powerful unit to have in the front line. The effect will trigger and cause no draw for the opponent next turn. And there's already an existing France German burn deck, so the 361st Africa Corps or Africa Regiment, I believe. With 3 credits, you can move that 3/3 infantry into the front line and deal 3 damage as well. This looks pretty powerful as combo part or in combination with some cards. Yeah, this is my first impression. What do you think, Bubbles?
I think it's definitely going to be a combo card. I mean, there's a few things I could see it working with. You could do some sort of meme things with the Chaffee, where you drop the Chaffee and you rush it up, you dupe the Chaffee. And you can also use this with cards that only affect the front line. So you can move an enemy unit into the front line and then play Strafing and pin the front line, or play a Torpedo and kill something in the front line. So maybe there's some weird, wacky USA-French combo deck there. It definitely seems like a combo card, and I'm excited to see what the smarter of us come up with in the community, and the rest of us can follow.
Anything to add, Spoos? Any other combos
Yeah,
you see?
Chaffee was also the thing that I thought instantly of when seeing that card. But you can also do stuff like, just imagine your opponent is having a big bomber or a big artillery unit sitting in the support line, and you cannot reach this because you have just slow infantry on your board, or the front line is just occupied. You just play this, pull it next to your line, and then you just kill it. So it has some. I always wanted a card like that because it just opens so much more strategy, and I'm pretty excited to try it out. And Bubbles is having.
I've just thought of a combo with this. If you're playing Mobilize and your opponent's not putting any unit, like they've just got bombers and they won't go into the front line, you can push their unit into the front line and then airdrop it back. It's
Yeah,
got a nice little combo with airdrop.
and that's what we
Ah.
just find out here in 2 minutes. Just
Yeah.
imagine when people just see the decks and say, oh, this could be good in that. So I'm really, that might be a very interesting card.
I also want to note, I mean, historically in cards, orders that cost 0 have tended to become pretty broken sometimes, right? Like, when the creativity of the player base has been allowed to run free for some time, there are situations where being able to play cards and not having to pay anything for them can create a significant advantage. And I think that's what we're going to see with this one. That's the niche and home it's going to find itself in. But that's going to be it for the first card from the upcoming World at War release called Behind Enemy Lines. That's going to be available on February 24th. Make sure to keep your eyes out as we reveal more cards in the coming days, including one at the end of this War Room. But let's jump on over into the decks. And I asked you, before we went live here, I asked each one of you to pick a deck that you were going to explain to us and we were going to discuss. And I want to start with Dion's Hyper Ramp USA Italy deck. Throwing that over to you, Bubbles. That is the deck that you wanted to see. This is an idea that you brought out a year ago and completely failed with, but now Dion is here trying to show that it can be done. What are your thoughts when you see this deck?
Yeah, so this is a deck which sort of first came out with Man Nostrum, because the ability to get these really, really big units and then use them with the Man Nostrum to heal back up meant if you could skip the early game against aggro, then you could just heal back up again. And it also meant you had these really expensive late game units just to destroy control. I'm super excited to see how it works out for DN, because it didn't work out quite so well for me. But DN has done some things which I definitely could have done with. Things like Pact of Steel to draw. Because, if all your cards are really expensive and all your opponent's cards are really cheap and you play Pact of Steel, it just becomes incredibly, efficient draw. And this is the issue with this deck. It is often you play all these ramp cards and then you find yourself in a scenario you don't actually have anything to use. So, you put more units into draw. So you play all these ramp cards, but then you don't have any draw. You find this issue where you can't quite find the balance. But I think Dean's found a pretty good balance here. He's got, I think a really nice thing going with the deck. He's got the Avengers in there. He's got the Super Fortress. He's got the Flying Fortress, the Pershing, the mass deployment. There's a lot of late game here. There's a lot of ramp and there's a lot of draw and a good chunk of healing. I think the main deciding factor on whether this deck works is how quickly Dean can find what they need compared to how quickly their opponent can run them over. Up against decks like Jaguar, which there is a bit of today, we've got some Germany, USA aggros, these sort of pretty quick aggro decks. If Dean is able to stabilize, he'll just destroy them in the late game. But if these are able to overrun him first, then he might be in trouble. I'm super excited to see how this works. And with the change to 99th, these guards like Decima and the Bologna are a little bit more reliable. So maybe this opens up to it.
Interesting, very interesting. Can we maybe bring up the deck and take a look at some of the key cards here? I've been thinking, of course, like Mare Nostrum is a key card. That's the thing that allows you to. Oh, we're not seeing that. We're not seeing the deck. I'm just seeing Bubbles. So, all right. So we're that's the mix up. There we go. Now we see it. Perfect. Apologies for this mix up, but I mean, I'm also looking at like the Jasco, getting that out early, even negating a few points of damage. If you're up against Jaguar or something, if you find Jasco early, that could be the difference between life or death. What else are you guys looking at here? Maybe you, Spoos.
Yeah, I'm just excited, or just not excited, but it's interesting that he's also playing Skytrain, a unit that was mostly played in that US mid-range deck. And I think that just shows how strong Skytrain is, even in ramp, because you just have those units that constantly spawn and maybe deal with your opponent's aggressive early game units. And what is also interesting is that mass deployment can be so strong in that deck. Just imagine having 20 credits, 22 maybe. I'm not sure what the optimal case is to reach credit, but I think you can easily reach the credit max of 24 credits. And then you just play a mass deployment. It's very, very likely that you get a blitz unit out of it, a B27F or a Pershing. And that can be really, really hard for your opponent to deal with. And then we have the B29 Super Fortress, the meme card themselves. Yeah. So let's see if we see a B29 maybe deciding a match today. That would be cool.
I think it could be crazy. Darkness, how do you beat this deck? Like, what are the weak points for this one? If I'm up against this deck, what am I looking to stop my opponent from doing, or am I just simply racing him on time? Is that the only thing I can do against this deck?
Well, it's nearly impossible to win late game against this deck list. And Dian managed the card draw very well by adding Pact of Steel to it. Usually this deck has a little less card draw, what is very weak against certain decks, especially discard decks. But the clear weakness of this deck is it lacks AoE, and it's very, very slow. So if you're not finding Jaguar turn 1, turn 2 Fear, turn 3 Bologna, and an additional Mare Nostrum, it's very hard to stand against tempo decks, against aggro, like Jaguar, US midrange, anything what is able to kill you into 4 turns, because there's a high chance you're not able to do anything against it in the few first turns. So this deck is clearly designed to beat control decks and will struggle against aggro a lot.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, we're not seeing a ton of like hyper aggro stuff today. I mean, we're seeing quite a bit of kind of Germany tank-based lists, fast Heinz without the fast Heinz, as Bubbles put it here earlier today. We're seeing, I think, one Jaguar list, but apart from that, we're seeing very varied types of lists that I would say aren't necessarily pushing the pace as much. So this could end up being a really strong deck here for Dion in this tournament. What do you agree with that, Bubbles?
Yeah, I mean there's 2 Jaguar decks. However, I do get what you mean. There's quite a varied amount of decks, so that it could very easily find a nice home in this tournament. I think there's going to be 2 factors at play for Dion here, which is how much they've practiced with it and a little bit of RNG. But if you practice with this deck, you know your outs. Even versus wide boards, there are solutions there. I know Darkness said about how you can very quickly get overrun, and that's completely true. But if you can manage to get past that and get some sort of, I don't know, guarded Avenger with the Bologna or guarded B-17 Fortress, you can actually very quickly clear this huge board and also heal yourself with Mare Nostrum in the process. There's a couple changes I would possibly like to see in maybe a ladder version of this deck, which is cards like the Privateer work quite nicely here, and also the other B-17, the one that's immune to orders. But I think overall, this deck has some real chances at victory, and if Dion is able to get it to pop off, I think it will be unstoppable.
All right. Let's look at the next deck, and that is from Tree Pipit. It's going to be his Soviet USA deck, and this was picked by Spoos. So what do you think of this one?
Yeah, I'm not even sure what I think about it, and that's why I wanted to discuss it in the big group here, because it's a deck that I've not seen in that version for like ever. Like, it's a very, very aggressive Soviet US aggro deck with the 554th Rifle Regiment in it. A very, very one of the fastest and easiest to deploy infantry units in the game, because it's just costing 0 credits with 0 operation costs. And that combined with the 109th Combat Engineers, for example, can give you a very, very fast opening. And yeah, what are the others thinking about this Darkness? Have you ever seen this deck before? I mean, in a variant maybe, but that aggressive, it's very interesting. Also with the close combat in it.
Yeah, I actually played against this deck list in the last Kards Open Qualifier. I faced this deck list, and it's very, very fast, and it has some crazy combo potentials. Like, you can deploy a ton of cheap infantry, get them into the front line pretty easily because of 0 till 1 operation cost. And then you play something like Unity is Strength or Close Combat or the new change of 99th Infantry Battalion to create pretty big units very early on. It has some crazy strong combo potential. And if you look at the curve, like 75% is between 0 and 2 operation costs. This deck nearly always pops off.
I have never seen a curve that low, ever. I mean, ever. There's 3 cards, and they're at 5 credits, and they're basically no surrender and 2 5-year plans, right? I mean, it's insane. And I think, the 99th Infantry Battalion change is huge here, right? What do you think, Bubbles?
Yeah, I agree. I think the 99th change is a big buff to this deck. I mean, it was really nice when it was bounce, but for decks like this, buffing up this unit to be really, really difficult to kill, kind of like the L640 deck, is sort of what you want from it. I do think the deck has a slight flaw where it relies solely on tempo, and once you've lost that tempo, you can find it very difficult to come back into the game. We do have cards like No Surrender to blitz out a bunch of light infantry. Without Ura, I don't think they're going to be enough to close out any game. So I think if you can keep the tempo on this, it's going to be really difficult to deal with. And they do have the tools to do that with cards like Red Dawn and Bloody Sickle as efficient removal. But I think the moment you get hit by some sort of AoE or some sort of anti-tempo card, you're in trouble. And I do think you should be worried if you're Trooper Pit here about the large amount of Legions today, because I think Legions are pretty good at answering this deck. They have a lot of guards, and a lot of them have a lot of AoE.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. We're seeing 3 different types of Legions decks with 3 different main nations, which is crazy to me. But I think this one is definitely going to be an interesting one. I thought about it in kind of relation to the deck we just saw from Dion, and I just thought, if Dion finds 2 Bologna regiments early, and maybe a Mare Nostrum, this deck is probably dead in the water, right? Just purely based on the fact that that's 14 additional HP that they have to burn through to get to the HQ.
Yeah.
Could be still possible. There's a lot of cheap removal, like Red Dawn, Bloody Sickle, 1 half track and 1 hammer. And if you have enough infantry units, you can create an 8/8 infantry in the front line.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's take a look at the third deck here, and that is another deck from Tree Pipit. Tree Pipit really breaking the meta here today, and that is his pin deck, Britain, Japan. And Darkness, you picked this one. So what was so interesting for you about this one?
Well, I saw him quite often playing something like this pin deck on ladder. It's a very rare deck. It's like ultra rare to spot anywhere. This is the first time someone really brings this deck to a tournament on broadcast. This is why I'm excited to see this deck list. But the combo is pretty easy. Like, you're pinning everything. You're just pinning everything, having some AoE with naval operation and shelling, carpet bombing. So you're able to clean the board against Token, against his other aggro deck, against J aggro, and even against big units in the control matchup with the effect of Sonya or Surprise Attack, or the 10-cent 5 credit bomber. You can instantly kill any pinned unit, what makes this combo really strong. However, this deck might misses some win conditions because it has mostly a lot of removal. But there is the Cromwell Mark IV, and a similar tank, the Matilda. The Matilda tank is pinning everything. Any unit what is getting damaged by this tank. We never saw this in an OCC before. I really like it. And the Cromwell is like an hidden win condition here, because most people shouldn't be familiar with this tank. It's 3/6 stats, heavy armor 1, and it's getting +1 attack every time a pinned enemy is destroyed. And with that amount of pin, this unit can become really big. So I'm happy to see this control deck beating some aggro, even killing big units and creating the Cromwell. However, the Cromwell is not protected by a lot. It's able to target it. He's not playing countermeasure.
The Cromwell, it sounds like an evil villain, right? In his deck, it's like, oh, he's building up the Cromwell, I feel like it definitely. And I mean, I'm looking at the Matilda there. When I started playing cards, I was like, the Matilda is the most OP card in this game. It hits things, it pins it. Oh my god, I'm never gonna stop playing this card. Then within 2 months, I think it had exited all my decks, and I never saw it again until now. I'm really, really excited to see if this deck works as well. What do you think about this one, Spoos?
Yeah, I mean, Darkness mentions a lot of the tactical perspective of the of that deck, and also about the problems of that deck. Because I tried it out in ladder, and it looks really strong to remove all units just by pinning them. But as Darkness mentioned, you don't have a real win condition. When your opponent is getting rid of your 2 crumbles, you can only have 2 of them in your deck. It's very hard to win. And if I see decks like the Hyper Ramp deck that Dion, for example, is playing, I don't see how he ever wins against this, because there is so many big units that can just get rid of his stuff, and it should be hard. It can be very good against aggressive decks, because you have naval operation in it, you have naval power to heal, you have the bombers, the albacore, stuff like that is very good against aggressive decks. But I think in a control matchup, you very, very often have a problem when you lose your Cromwell.
Yeah, I mean, we also see the Comet there, the A34 Comet. That's another card we really, really rarely see here in kind of Britain tournament decks or high-level decks. Bubbles, what do you think of this one?
I'm super excited to see the Comet here. It's one of my favorite cards in the game. I absolutely love this tank. Whenever I play His Majesty's Chosen, I'm snap picking the Comet over all the good choices. It's one of my favorite cards. There's also something, I did a little counting. I had to get my fingers out and work it out. There are 23 pin cards in this deck, right? And if that wasn't scary enough for an aggressive deck, there's also 7 sources of AoE. So there's 7 sources of AoE and 23 pin cards, and that's not even counting the Sonia, which combos with pin but doesn't pin in itself. And the rest is stuff like draw. So if you're an aggro deck, you're sort of thinking, I can't go wide because there's 7 cards of AoE, and I can't go tall because there's 23 cards of pin. I'm excited to see this deck in action. I really hope this works.
This reminds me of I did a show match for kind of the invitational tournament that Raging Jim Raynor held. And it was against Ohio Corn Guy, and he was crushing me early on, but I ended up pinning his entire board, and that was not with 27 pin cards, right? That was with like 8 in my deck, but I still managed to pin his entire board for like 8 turns. So I can only imagine the experience of trying to, just play anything into this pin deck. It's gonna be, I think, absolutely crazy. Let's look at the last deck that we kind of highlighted here. It's a deck from Kato, Japan and Poland. So Japan Legions are making an appearance here in the Officer Club Championship, and I gotta say, I have never seen this deck before. And I'm mostly going to be relying on you guys telling me what is going on here, because for some reason I would not have thought that Japan and Poland would have had great synergies. Can you talk me through this one, Darkness?
Yeah, this Japan Legion deck appeared firstly, really firstly, not just from scratch, with the last change and the new card, the 3 credit giving you 33 recons. Scouting? No, it's not scouting
party. Scouting party.
It's scouting party.
Yeah. Okay. And the change to long range recon, giving you intel as well. That added 2 more intel cards to Japan, and this is why people started to test out this deck version. It is very similar to Japan Frank's Resistance, actually, having a lot of AoE, having a lot of control, and some kinds of removal, like upraising, banzai, the usual stuff with Sendai Regiment and bombing rate. So this deck should be good against aggro. It really should, and it has some little different win conditions. Look, comparing to Japan Frank's Resistance, by adding those Legion units and making them bigger, actually giving this control deck some unit threats, while still keeping the Kawanishi and Kamikaze combo. So this deck works similar. You're just pinning, you're playing AoE, killing all of the small units while growing your legions. And if this game goes longer and longer, you have Banzai and To the Last Man to control the entire board. Uprising are basically a To the Last Man if you killed enough
Yeah.
Polish cards. So this makes this kind of scary. Shiden and Kika is another threat in the late game, and if everything is being played, this deck has Kamikaze plus Kawanishi, what is terrifying. Well,
Yeah, I mean, man, it really, really, really feels loaded with threats. This deck.
Yes, absolutely. However, this deck is very, very new. People are only playing this since 1 or 2 weeks on ladder, and these are only the pioneers, the experimental stuff. So I don't know if this deck will be good or not. J-King thinks this archetype is terrible. I think it has potential. So yeah, people need to test that, and this is why I love this player bringing this deck list into the OCC. Yeah, let's test that.
Yeah, I mean, credit to Kato for bringing this deck. Spoos, have you played against this deck?
No, but when the balance change came out, the chat was always requesting I should play Japan Legions, Japan Legions. Everybody just requested Japan Legions, and I said, guys, just long range recon was changed. It was not even buffed, it was just changed. It just got Intel 1. And then there was Scouting Party, which I'm still not really convinced of. But somehow people just think suddenly Japan Legions is a thing, and we see Kato is also convinced that it might be a good deck. And just looking at the list, it feels like so if you just look at the Japanese cards, you would instantly think, oh, this is Japan France Resistance.
Yeah.
But looking at the right side, seeing Uprising, it might be just an even more annoying Japan Resistance deck. Like you have the Uprising, which is 2 more board clear with all the Legions card or Polish card that dies in the progress of the game. So
Yep.
it's very hard to go wide against this deck. If you have a deck that is, I don't know, it's very hard to play against it, I guess, because the Legions are just guarding the HQ, so you cannot really go wide or make a big unit, because there's always the risk that your whole board is just getting wiped and you have to start from scratch developing threats. And as Darkness, I'm really excited to see if this works out. When I heard Japan Legions, I thought, I don't think this is good, but maybe I'm proven wrong today.
Yeah. What about you, Bubbles? Do you have any experience with this deck?
A small amount. There are a few combos in here which I think are important to look out for. We've got cards like the Kards, which fill your hand full of these sections, and then you can actually just turn these into regular cards with a redeployment and just shuffle them into your deck and get actual useful things. We also see the Banzai in here. Now, this was played in Resistance because you didn't have any units, but in Poland Ally with Legions, your Legions will often have more than 4 attacks. So Banzai is essentially kill all your opponent units, leave yours on the board. But it also combos with the Takasaki, where you can wipe your opponent's board, and as you no longer need the guard because your opponent's board is gone, it kills your own Takasaki and discards something from your opponent's hand. So there's a nice little combo there. And I also think, like Spoo said with these Uprisings, we've got Banzai, To the Last Man, double naval operation, Tora, Desperate Measures, and 2 Uprisings. There's so much AoE, it's just going to be real difficult to establish a board against. So I think there's a lot of wrenches to throw at your opponent in this deck.
I mean, I'm looking at this deck and I'm thinking, you know who would have a great time against this deck? Dion's Hyper Ramp deck. It's just like, you know, he plays nothing that doesn't have high HP stats, right? He's focusing on ramping early when there's not a ton of pressure coming out from Kato on this one, and you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to be like 20 something credits. And you know, his whole thing is like, I'm gonna sustain you over time, but then all of a sudden you blitz out a B29 Super Fortress and one shot them. That's a matchup I want to see today for sure. So these were just a selection of the decks that are being played here today. There are other notable decks coming in here. We have a mobilized deck. We have we have some German tank decks. What else were some standout decks that you were looking at? Without going into too many details, we're just wrapping up. We're then going to go reveal the second card from the upcoming World at War expansion coming February 24th. But what are the other standout decks, Spoos?
Yeah, we have everything. We have the most versatile OCC deck list in like ever, I guess. We have Fast Heinz, we have Mobilize, we have Hyper Ramp, we have Autocannon with Soviet Ally, we have Discard Draw Denial from J King, we have three different main nation legion stacks, as you mentioned earlier. We have cards like Premier Regiment Étranger, that 5-drop, that 1/1 that is gaining stats for each cards in enemy hand. We looked at 4 insane decks here just right now, and yeah, I'm pretty. And we only have 1 Brit Air, I guess. So people should be really hyped about today's OCC because we have so much to see and so much to discover, and I can't wait for the games today.
I hadn't even realized that we have an autocannon deck with a Soviet ally. What?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mother Russia in
going
it.
on?
And it's a new version of this deck list, focusing promotion instead of some other draws like the Panzer 38T.
Yeah,
So-
I am extremely excited about this one. Well, before we wrap this one up, let's reveal the second card here from Behind Enemy Lines coming your way February 24th. Let's bring that up on the screen right about now. And this is my favorite reveal ever. It's Commandos! 2 credit, 1 operation cost. Commandos Kiefer, a French commando unit. 0 attack, 1 defense, but it has mobilize and smokescreen. And this one deals 1 damage to a random enemy when your HQ gains defense. Bubbles, you're itching to jump in on this one.
I love this card with the Potes and the Honey. You do so many pings with Mobilize. There's so much fun I'm going to have with this card. I'm going to be a Mobilize and a Commando. Mobilize is one of my favorite decks, and this just takes it even further. It is such a fun card. And with Secret Operatives and Smokescreen, it's super difficult for your opponents to even kill in the first place. I am so hyped for this card. This is the first card I'm building a deck around. This card right here. I'm going to do so many life gain things. I'm just going to see what works and what doesn't. And
So, yeah.
I'm probably going to annoy everyone in the process.
I mean, this just in a Commonwealth deck, right? I mean, like the fact that you have this, single card win condition on the Brit side that you can put in here in a Commonwealth deck, and this just perfectly synergizes with that. You're dealing damage as you're healing. Spoos, what do you think?
Yeah, and the cool thing is, if you compare it to the Commandos, that is dealing or just pinging once when you play an order. Just imagine you have 3 honeys on board and 1 of these. And each time you draw, you heal or you draw a card, just imagine triple honey convoy. You just deal 6 damage, and I think this card has some insane potential, and I really want to build a deck around it. As Bubbles said, that card looks nice.
What do you think, Darkness?
Yeah, it's instantly a great addition for Commandos. Forget the British Soviet Commandos, British German, whatever. British Franks is the new commando now. And of course, this is a great addition to Mobilize. Like, this card is immediately great into 2 different archetypes. Really looking forward to play this.
I just see, the Commandos Kiefer looking at the number 10 commando and going like, look at me. I am the commando now. I am the commando now. It's just like, these are gonna be the new go-to commandos, right? No, I'm so excited. When I realized that we could do a commando reveal in the war room, I just got all giddy yesterday. I'm of course a huge fan of commandos, as everybody should know. I've been playing them quite a bit on ladder recently, and I've not been having great success. So this one gets me all excited. But I think this is going to be it for us in the war room. It's been really good covering these decks. 2 awesome new cards. We got Chasing Shadows, a 0 credit order that it's a French order as well. It pushes you up into the front line, any unit. You can use that in many different combo pieces. And then, of course, the Commandos Kiefer. So that's all coming to you in World at War Behind Enemy Lines, dropping on February 24th.